Well, hello, boys and girls, and welcome to Movie Goodness, where we examine life through cinema here on the KB Radio Network. I am your host, Kevin Reed, and today's a very special episode of Movie Goodness because we're talking about something that is near and dear to my heart. We are celebrating. This past week marked the 25th anniversary of the release of a film that I consider the birth of the comic book superhero franchise films that we are enjoying today. And it is none other than the 1998 superhero film Blade, which starred Wesley Snipes. And I I can't tell you how much I love this movie. Well, that's a lie. I can summarize it like this. I went to the theater to watch Blade 4 times. I went 4 times. That's the only movie I have ever went repeated repeatedly to watch in the theater. I have watched films twice. I went to see Jurassic Park twice in the theater. I went to go see Black Panther. I went to go see Black Panther twice recently, and that's about it. I can't think of any others, but I know I did go to see movies. Mortal Kombat, not the recent one, the original one from the 90s. I went to see that multiple times because at the time I thought it was the greatest thing since sliced bread. Now, not so much, but I did go see that multiple times. The Matrix, I went to go see multiple times, but this is the only film I went 4 times to go see. I went with my cousin the first time. I was so excited, I drugged my dad to go see it. And I went by myself. And I think the last time I went to go see it, I took a date. How romantic. I took a date to go see Blake. But nonetheless, nothing came out of that relationship. So I guess she saw the writing on the wall and said, nah, not for me. But I will say we both are better for it. Well, at least I am. I don't know what happened with her, but that's besides the point. I love Blade. And, normally when a film has an impact like that, like this, when I was younger, and I get older and I watch it again, I'm like, why did I like this movie? But like the aforementioned Mortal Kombat, Mortal Kombat was, I felt it should have been an Academy Award winning film at that time. Now it is campy and poorly acted and choppy special effects, to say it mildly. But at the time, I loved it. This film still holds the same impact to me. I still love Blade, and it's a sequel. I didn't care for Blade Trinity, but I love Blade 2. But the first one still holds a place in my heart, and it's crazy to think that it's been 25 years. It blows my mind, honestly. I mean, I remember it like it was yesterday. I remember each time I went to the theater to watch it. I remember when it came out on video and I rented it. I remember when I bought it, It was just one of those movies that stuck with me and it still holds up to this day. But before we go into the review of Blade, we're going to go over a little history. We're going to go through not the history of Blade per se in the comics, but we're going to go through how this film came to be and how it impacted superhero films that we watch today. I need everybody to realize, if it wasn't for Blade, and I'm not just throwing this out there, this is an actual fact. This is a fact. If it wasn't for Blade, there would be no Avengers Endgame. There would be no Blue Beetles. There would be no Superman Legacies. There would be no Iron Mans. There would have been no superhero films. This film was the last ditch effort from Marvel Comics or Marvel Studios, whatever you want to call it. But Marvel was heading towards bankruptcy at the time, and they were about to close their doors on everything. They were about to sell off all of their characters and properties to DC, nonetheless, which is crazy to think about. But they were broke. They were broke. They've tried live action adaptations up to this point, and they all failed. It was a Fantastic Four film that didn't even get released. That was a money loser for them. There was a Captain America film from the early '90s that was horrible. If you ever seen that movie, there was a Punisher film where we saw Dolph Lundgren, nonetheless, play Frank Castle, aka the Punisher. And that was, to be honest with you, that movie wasn't bad. It just wasn't Punisher, But they just were striking out on every attempt. They couldn't get a Spider-Man film off the ground. They couldn't, despite the fact that James Cameron was trying to make a Spider-Man film, and they still couldn't get that movie off the ground. And so nothing worked for Marvel. And this was it. This was the final straw here, and this was just something to throw out there because this Blade is a lesser known character. Not too many people knew about Blade from the comics. If you're a real comic head, you knew who Blade was, but there's nobody screaming for a Blade film in 1998. There was nobody like, ooh, Blade. But even Wesley Snipes, who ended up playing the role of Blade, this wasn't his first choice at playing a comic book character from Marvel. His first attempt was Black Panther, which would have been bananas. This is one of the biggest regrets in life. Actually, it's kind of 50-50. It's kind of it's good that it didn't happen, but at the same time, you would have liked to seen it happen. Reason being, if Black Panther would have been made in 1998, we wouldn't have got the Black Panther that we received in, 2019, 2018. And so with Chadwick Boseman, R.I.P., we wouldn't have got that, so the impact would have been less significant in that film from Ryan Coogler in Marvel Studios had we already seen a Black Panther film 20 years prior. And so it's kind of good in that aspect, because that film was excellent. It's still one of the best comic book movies ever made. It's probably, dare I say, one of the best films ever made, depending on where your stance are. But I would have loved to have seen Wesley Snipes play T'Challa. I would have loved to have seen that because he was born to play that role. It was for him. It was tailor-made for him to play this role because let's not forget, people, Wesley Snipes is an accomplished actor. He is an excellent actor, not just an action star. He is an awesome actor. You don't believe me? Go back and watch his collaborations with Spike Lee. Look, watch Jungle Fever. Watch Mo Better Blues. Films like that. Even his films that came out in the 90s, Rising Sun, that he co-starred with Sean Connery in, or Passenger 57, great acting. He had the ability to not only pull off the action, but act well. Wesley Snipes rarely gives a bad performance. Blade Trinity aside. I mean, I'm pretty sure everybody heard the horror stories from that set, what took place between Wesley Snipes and the director David Goyer. It was the fact that movie got finished and released is a miracle from God above. But it was it was taxing. But he is an excellent actor, even in this film. But we'll get to that when we get to the review. But I would have loved to have seen him play T'Challa in a Black Panther film. I think the late great John Singleton at one time was attached to direct the Black Panther film, and they couldn't get on the same page with the direction they wanted to go in, being as though Wesley Snipes wanted to set it in Africa, whereas John Singleton wanted to set it in modern day Los Angeles, and that just did not mesh. So that fell through. But Wesley Snipes was determined to play a comic book character, a comic book hero, should I say. And let's go through the production, how Blade was able to grace the silver screen in 1998. Let's start off with the character. The character of Blade was created in 1973 by Marvel Comics writers Marv Wolfman and artist Gene Colan. As a supporting character in the 1970s comic, The Tomb of Dracula. In the comic book, Blade used teak wood knives and was much more in every man in his behavior and attitude. Through courage and bravery, he displayed flaws as well, such as the inability to get along with other cast members in the comics and a hatred for vampires that bordered on just hysteria. The character was not originally a daywalker. He was a human being immune to being turned into a vampire. So early on, he didn't have superhuman strength and speed like a vampire did. He relied solely on his wits and his skill until he was bitten by the Marvel's character Morbius, as seen in Peter Parker Spider-Man number 8. That was first published in August of 1999. Now, the film portrayal of Blade was updated for the 90s audience, and the comics character was, more kind of morphed into that version of the character. David Gore replaced the daggers for Blade used in the comics with a sword and gave him a more samurai-like aesthetic, and I think that helped the character out a lot. The film version of Deacon Frost differs greatly from the version in the comics. He was older with white hair, and he looked like a church deacon. He literally looked like a deacon in church. But the film did retain his ambitions. It's pretty much the same ambitions as he had in the comics. When New World Pictures brought the rights to Marvel Comics, they were set to make a Mexican style Western that starred Richard Roundtree, nonetheless, who we may know as Shaft, to portray the character of Blade. In 1992, Marvel Studios had started developing a film when LL Cool J, yes, Mama said knock you out, LL Cool J, he was interested in playing the role. Blade was eventually set up at New Line Cinemas with David S. Goyer writing the screenplay. When Goyer heard a film was in development, he went in to pitch with director Ernest Dickerson. Ernest Dickerson is a filmmaker with a lot of skins on the wall. He started off as a cinematographer, mainly with Spike Lee. He was the director of photography on She's Gotta Have It, School Days, Do the Right Thing, Mo Better Blues. The list goes on and on. Eddie Murphy Raw, Malcolm X. He is an accomplished director of photography, but he's also a film director who has directed such films as Juice. Yes, the film that starred Tupac Shakur in his directorial debut. He also directed Demon Knight, that Tales from the Crypt film, which is one of my sneaky favorite little movies from the 90s. I love that movie. I don't know why, but he also directed episodes of The Wire and Law and Order, and so many different other recent projects on television as well. But New Line Cinema originally wanted to do Blade as something that is almost like a spoof or a satire type of film, a comedy, before the writer, being David S. Goyer, had convinced them otherwise. At one point, the studio even asked if Blade could be white. David S. Goyer wanted to take the character seriously and ground him in a sense of reality with vampirism as a biological disease, so to speak. Uh, he even pitched a trilogy of movies. He also wanted to demythicize the vampires and treat them as a serious villain with a great sense of realism instead of this doomed romantic characters from the Anne Rice novels, or from the Twilight movie. When David S. Goyer first pitched the idea of doing Blade, he threw out three names as the character of Blade: Denzel Washington, Wesley Snipes, and Lawrence Fishburne. But in Goyer's eyes, Wesley Snipes was the perfect choice. And I believe the script was finalized and sent to Wesley Snipes, and no other actor was seriously considered. Peter McGould was the first choice to play Whistler because Stephen Norton, who was the director, was a big fan of the Prisoner from 1967, but that didn't go through. Other considerations for the role of Whistler was John Voight, but eventually the role went to Chris Christopherson. Cameras rolled on Blade on February the 5th, 1997, with a production budget of $45 million, in large part done in Los Angeles and some scenes being shot in Death Valley. Blade hit theaters in August of 1998 and it set the stage to further comic film adaptations. Blade was Marvel's first box office success. Of the $45 million budget, the film went on to gross $131.2 million worldwide. And this film, I can honestly say, was ahead of its time. It is a film that holds up to this day, as I said before, because you can set it in any time period. It isn't dated. It still holds up. It's not pigeonholed by a certain style. I guess it's no point holding it off. It's no point trying to put off this review. We're just gonna go into the review. We're going to review the 1998 just classic, in my humble opinion, starring Wesley Snipes, Stephen Dorff, Chris Christopherson, directed by Stephen Norton, Blade. I cannot believe that this film got made. I can't believe that they actually made this movie. I knew of Blade. I didn't read Blade comics, but I knew of Blade. I remember first time seeing him was on the Spider-Man cartoon, the animated series that came out in the 90s. And I was in awe because it was a black character, for one, because you didn't see a lot of those. And it was in animation, and it's this vampire hunter. It was based around this Morbius storyline that was going on the show. And, aside from that monstrosity of a movie that we saw, was it last year, year before last? I don't even remember, but it was horrible. And that's basically the origins of Blade in the comics. It dealt with Morbius, but this version of this story was absolutely incredible. You got to ask yourself, why do I still love Blade? Why do you still come back to Blade? Why does Blade still stand as one of the most entertaining films of its kind after 25 years and dozens, if not hundreds, of movies that have sought to follow this superhero glory? Well, it's because this film, for some strange reason, just sticks out like a sore thumb. It sticks out in a good way. It's not like, oh my God, that was horrible. It's not Batman and Robin. This was this was actually a good movie. From the beginning, it's clear that Blade is walking a fine line, much like the title character, Daywalker Nature, as a human/vampire hybrid. There are, of course, elements of the Marvel Comics source material scattered throughout the film, and it's very clear that it's dealing with a comic book world, so to speak. There's a heightened reality where weapons, monsters, and heroes behave in a certain way that, dare I say, is more grounded than films would might have allowed around that time, or even now. It's really a sense of reality in this fantastical world. But while the comic bookness of Blade was never in doubt, the film also has plenty of liberties. Wesley Snipes' title character looks and acts very differently from the comics version of the character. The character, you know, in the comics, as I said earlier, didn't have this daywalker persona. But I think that helped this character a lot. It actually added to this character. A lot of this is just, to add a certain cinematic flair, so to speak, that a lot of films in the 90s did. They changed up a lot. Even now, you watch comic book films now, and a lot has changed in a lot of the characters that we read in the comics when we were younger. You know what I'm saying? For instance, in the film version here, now you also got to keep in account this is the 90s. This is the late 90s here. And so they were working, they were kind of working with their hands behind their back, so to speak. They had to kind of dress up a character in a certain way. They gave Blade sunglasses and a trench coat, to match the vibe of the movie. And speaking of vibe, this movie is R, rated R, and I mean a hard R. And to relate a comic book film with an R rating is like the kiss of death. Only certain films have survived this rating, and it's really certain. I say certain, but there haven't been a lot of R-rated comic book films. Yeah, you had Blade, Deadpool 2. That's about it. They don't, because studios are scared of that. You putting these comic book characters in R-rated films that children can't watch, because contrary to the studio's belief, comic book movies aren't just for kids. I know a lot of people think that comic book movie, that's kids. Comic books, that's for kids. No, pick up a comic book. Pick up any comic book. I don't care what the character is. You can pick up a Spider-Man comic book and find some mature material in it. Any comic book. I'm not saying mature like it was sex and all that foolishness, but I mean mature subject matter, drug use and all this other stuff, dealing with real life issues. Real life is rated R, people. In case you didn't know, real life is not PG. It's not even PG-13. Actually, it ain't even R. Real life is NC-17. So, I mean, deal with it. But yeah, this movie is R, and this is something that certain comic book movie fans have been championing as of late. More people who go to the cinema who are comic book fans, they know the truth. So they're like, well, don't hold back. Actually, make the movie, make the characters the way they are in the comics. Don't kitty it up. Don't sprinkle any dust on it, any pixie dust on it, and think, oh yeah, let's get the kids out to see it. Not everything needs to be watched by kids. Blade is definitely not for the kiddies, and we get that in this opening scene. The opening scene of this movie lets you know exactly what you're in for. We go to this club setting. You see people dancing, guy walking through the club with a woman, where the woman brings him in there. Unbeknownst to him, she's a vampire, and she brought him to this vampire club where they can feed on him. And they're all dancing in there. Everybody's, getting their twerk on, and all of a sudden the sprinkler system come on, but water doesn't come out. It's blood. It's a bloodbath, literally. It is raining blood, and it's all over it's over everybody. It's the vampires are just licking it up and all this here, and they smell it on this innocent dude, and oh my god, they about to tear him apart. It is probably the worst case scenario of any scenario any human being will want to be in. It's like being being dropped in the lion's den or with a pack of wolves. It was like, oh my god, what are you gonna do? And all of a sudden you see this black boot standing there in the middle of the club, and the camera pans up and you see the black leather pants and the black leather trench coat, and this dude standing there with the sunglasses on, and you see the sword in his bag, and you're like, oh my god, this is about to get real. And it gets real really fast in that scene, and I'm like, oh man, this is awesome. I failed to mention that Wesley Snipes is an accomplished martial artist. He has multiple black belts. He is I forgot I think he's a grandmaster, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong if I'm giving him that title unwarranted, but if he's not one, he's close to it. The dude it's real. What you seen on screen, that's him. That's not a stunt double. That is him. And so he's going through these people with the sword, working them. He has this blade, this little boomerang blade that cuts him in half and all this other. And it's not like when he kills the vampires, it's like gore with that. They turn to dust, so to speak, or they disintegrate. And I appreciated that because, it differentiates human beings from your villains, And I thought that was a nice touch to this movie. The R rating is instead in service of this larger tonal balance. One stuck through the action and the cinematography, and of course through Wesley Snipes' core performance, his skill, his swagger, his sheer devotion to disappear behind those sunglasses and emerge as Blade, this standalone character. Speaking of characters, Steven Dorff. Steven Dorff is one of the best villains I've seen in film. Not comic book villains. I'm talking in all genres of film. And I've seen where, recently in the past couple of years, where people make fun of that performance from Steven Dorff as Deacon Frost. Like, it's campy, it's one note, it's this, it's that. I disagree. I think Steven Dorff did an amazing job as Deacon Frost. He was funny, he was menacing, he held his own against Wesley Snipes. I mean, he was really, really an awesome villain. I mentioned before, and I can't even remember which show I was talking about it on, where your villain, or should I say your hero, is only as good as the villain. If the villain doesn't work, more often than not, the hero is not going to work, and vice versa. In this film, we have Deacon Frost always being a step ahead of Blade. He was always a step ahead. He knew about Blade. He studied Blade. We find out later that he had a hand. Now, this is the film continuity, not the comics continuity. It was Deacon Frost who bit his mother when she was pregnant with Blade. And so he is the reason Blade's Blade. And I thought that was a nice twist to this movie or this story. I was like, oh man. And to add insult to injury, his mother survived. His mother is a vampire who is there with Deacon Frost. And we find that out the end. Blade's mother, portrayed by Shania Layton, should I say? And I chuckle at that because Wesley Snipes and Shania Layton played lovers in a film. Not around that time. I think it was Disappearing Acts was the name of the movie. And they were lovers. And then we fast forward or rewind a couple of years, or maybe it was the same year. I know it was around that time period. Anywho's their mother and son It's the strangest thing. It's crazy. Uh, but that's just something that sticks in my head and lives rent free. Now it's in yours, so you're welcome. But I found the Deacon Frost character very fascinating and very fitting for this film. Now, if you want to sit down and compare him to Joker or Thanos or this, that, and the third, I mean, come on, that's ridiculous. Of course, no, he's not up to that level. But film, for this film, speaking of villains, let me give this example, and we're gonna get back to Blade. One of my favorite villain portrayals was in a film called The Professional, or Leon the Professional, depending on where you're at. The villain in that film was portrayed by Gary Oldman. I can't think of the character's name. I used to know it by heart, but that character was so crazy. I mean, Gary Oldman. He, that was when I fell in love with Gary Oldman as an actor. You know, I've seen him in films before that, and definitely seen him after. But this was the performance where I sat back and was like, "My God, this dude is insane. This is a villain. This was a cold-blooded killer of a villain, literally and figuratively, and I just loved it. Now, is he the greatest movie villain of all time? No, but he was the greatest for that film. When you put it in the perspective of that film, he was great, you know. And it's the same thing here. When you put Stephen Dorff's performance as Deacon Falls in this rightful perspective, this is great, man. This was a great performance, and I loved the job he did. I loved the job that Chris Christopherson did as Whistler. The relationship, the chemistry between Chris Christopherson and Wesley Snipes is beautiful, and it lasted for the three films in this trilogy. The father and son element that they had, that for the little bit that I read in the comics, it really wasn't there. You know, they had a relationship, but it wasn't so much of a father and son element. Now, granted, I didn't read every Blade issue, so I can't, I may be misspeaking here, but in this film, I really loved it. I loved the chemistry between these characters and these actors. It was just beautifully written. It was a subtle thing. It wasn't like they sat there, oh, I love you, or make it back safe, it's stuff like that. But it was just the subtleties of the characters that you knew that they cared for each other. It was beautifully acted and written, dare I say. And it's almost unmatched. It's almost unmatched. Chris Christopherson, man, great job as Whistler, Abraham Whistler, should I say, and Boucher Wright as Dr. Jensen. I loved her. I loved her in this film. She plays the doctor who was bitten by a vampire, and she finds a way to cure herself, and she's trying to find a cure for Blade. And it's a nice relationship there, and they didn't go the typical love interest route here that we saw in a lot of movies, still see in a lot of movies today. It wasn't that. Blade was just a blunt force instrument of terror. He didn't take time for a romantic relationship. He didn't have time for that. It really wasn't that. There was some I guess you could say hints to it, but nothing to be like, oh, they'll end up together at the end, or they're going to kiss at the end of the movie at the climax. No, it was none of that. Now, you can count when he bit her to get his strength back as, I guess, a act of love. At least that's the way it came off as. It was very sexy, I'll say that much, but it wasn't for pleasure. It was for business. So there was that. But yeah, the performances in this film was great. I think everybody did an excellent job with their characters. The action in this film Oh man, it's unmatched. It's really unmatched. And I'll say that because this was all practical. This was all in camera. This wasn't a CGI fest. This wasn't a giant beam in the sky. This was fisticuffs. This was swordplay. This was knives and all this other stuff. All this fighting that was just beautifully choreographed throughout the film, and especially that final fight at the end, which still holds up as one of the best final fights in film history. Uh, this was a precursor to what we saw, I think, the following year with The Matrix. You know, The Matrix took it to another level, but it started with Blade. See, Blade touched in on a lot of genres. Yeah, it spearheaded the comic book film genre, but it also helped out the vampire movie genre. You know, we got a lot of vampire hunter movies after this. We got different action styles, the way action movies or fight scenes were filmed after this. You know, I know a lot of people point to the Matrix as changing a lot, but I think the Matrix looked at Blade and the way they filmed their action and decided to step it up, because at that time this was an amazing fight scene at the end and still holds up to this day. I cannot I cannot compare it to anything that has came out or come out recently, especially in the comic book genre, because everything is a CGI battle. You know, it's a CGI battle. Now, CGI has its place, and I know a lot of things you can't do practically, and so I excuse it and I enjoy it for what it is. But to see actual actors and actresses and stunt people performing, oh man, there's something about that that just makes it that much better. And my gosh, man, this was this was a tour de force of action and swordplay by Wesley Snipes in this film. One of the reasons why it was successful as it was and why it still holds up to this day. Which brings me to what I think is the real secret to Blade's success. The reason this movie still works and still captivates audiences 25 years after the comic book movie expansion and flat out domination, might I add. Right now, we're living in a day and time that the comic book genre or superhero film genre, where we ask a lot of questions, whether we want it or not. Or, you know, how everything related to everything else. For example, can you watch The Flash without knowing what else is going on in the DC universe? Or can I watch Ant-Man Quantumania and it makes sense without me watching Loki? Or will the next Avengers film actually work with the same sense of magic and wonder that the previous ones did, now that we know the formula of this franchise? You know, these are questions films and the TV shows demand we ask as of late. And then there's Blade. Blade, a film that offers none of those questions, yet still feels like it exists in part of a larger world. Blade doesn't work because it abandons the comic book origins, nor does it work because it embraces the comic book origins. It works because, like the character himself, it's a film that delights in walking into different worlds. There is simultaneously a sense of celebrating the comic book movie and departing from the comic book movie. It makes it a singular achievement and a film uniquely suited to captivate us for many more years to come. Blade from 1998 gets a letter grade of an A. This film is a juggernaut of a comic book / superhero film. And I think it deserves all the love that it is warranted. It is looked upon, or looked past, should I say, as the film that spearheaded these superhero films of late. You know, I think a lot of people look towards the X-Men films that came out 2 years after this, or Spider-Man from Sam Raimi that came out a couple of years after this. No, those films exist because of Blade. As I said before, Marvel was bankrupt. They were bankrupt. This was their last ditch effort. And if Blade didn't work, if Blade didn't make money, there was no way we were going to get X-Men in 2 years. There was no way we were going to get Spider-Man from Sony. It was no way we were going to get those films that led up to the MCU. And so tip your hat to Wesley Snipes, to Steve Norton, to David S. Goyer, to everybody involved in the production of Blade from 1998. This is one of my favorite movies of all time. It's not a guilty pleasure. It is one of my favorite movies. I still occasionally, from time to time, at least once a year, I'll watch Blade and the sequel Blade 2. I will watch it, you know, because I love this movie. It still holds up, man. It holds up. And that leads me to the sequels and the TV show and the new reboot that is coming out, hopefully, because I don't, the way this movie production is going, I doubt if we even get it. But it did spawn off two sequels. Blade 2, which was directed by Guillermo del Toro. Wesley Snipes returned as the character. Amazing sequel to the first. It is really good. It's up there with the first, but the first one still has a special place in my heart. But I did enjoy the second one. It is really, really good. The third one, not so much. Now, the third one was directed by David S. Goyer, as well as writing. He wrote all three, but the third one he directed himself. And as I said before, him and Wesley Snipes had a falling out during the making of this film. He didn't even speak to him, didn't talk to him, didn't talk to the cast. Wesley Snipes and Ryan Reynolds didn't get along on the set. It was just a mess. And that movie, you could tell when you watch that movie. Nobody wanted to be there. Nobody wanted to be on that film set. And it radiated through the screen. And that movie was bad. And I think the following year, I don't think they wasted time. There was the Blade, the series. They starring Sticky Fingers from Onyx, which did not work. I think I watched one episode and I was out. I said, "Yep, I'm good. I'm good. I don't care what happens on the rest of this show. I've seen enough." And it didn't last long. It was on Spike. Was it Spike TV? I think so. That old channel. And whatever. But there is a glimmer of hope. You know, in May of 2013, Marvel Studios was working on a new Blade film after they regained the rights from New Line Cinema. And now it is officially a property of Marvel. In February of 2019, Mahershala Ali approached Marvel Studios about starring in a new film. And after previously portraying Cottonmouth on I think it was Netflix. Yeah, Netflix Luke Cage, you know, season 1 of Luke Cage, which was awesome. Season 1 was good. But season 1 was great. And he played Cottonmouth on there. And he approached Kevin Feige about portraying Blade. And so Kevin Feige officially announced that the film with Mahershala Ali in the title role would happen at Comic-Con that year. Now, technically, we did get Mahershala Ali as Blade already. We've seen, well, not seen, we heard his voice in the Eternals post-credit scene when he spoke to, what's his name? I forgot his name. Cat Daddy, who played Jon Snow on Game of Thrones. Yeah, he spoke to him. So we heard Mahershala Ali's voice. In turn, we heard Blade's voice telling his character, Jon Snow character, don't touch the ebony blade or whatever. So there's that. So we did get that. But as far as a Blade movie in February of 2021, they had a director hired, they had a writer, the screenplay was written, pre-production had got on its way, and then the director left due to creative differences. Another director was hired in November of 2022, and they reworked the screenplay because apparently the screenplay was only like 60 pages long or something like that. And in case you don't know, screenplay for a feature film needs to be at least 120 pages, at least. And so to have a 60-page script for a Blade film, it was an embarrassment. So that screenplay was thrown out. Now, filming is expected to begin following the writer's strike. It's supposed to filming is supposed to take place in Atlanta, also in Cleveland, as well as Morocco and New Orleans. Yeah, Blade's gonna be down here, and so filming is supposed to ramp up as soon as the writer's strike and the actor's strike is over. The new Blade is scheduled to be released on Valentine's Day 2025. So we are allegedly going to get another Blade film. Now, initially, the film was scheduled to come out November of this year. It was supposed to be all wrapped up and ready to go November of this year, but with the directors and the writers and changing of the guards and all this here, it kept getting pushed back. Now they settled on a date of February 14th, 2025. So keep your fingers crossed for a new Blade starring Mahershala Ali. And I like that. I like Mahershala. I mean, he's a 2-time Academy Award winning actor, but that doesn't mean anything. I mean, Helen Mirren was in the Fast and the Furious films. so was Julie Dench. So that goes to it doesn't matter. But I'm a huge fan of Mahershala Ali. I think he's one of the best actors in Hollywood working, honestly. And him taking the role of Blade would be amazing. But I mean, I wish Wesley Snipes could get one more crack at it. You know, in a perfect world, I wish he could have got one more crack at it to do it right. Because leaving that bad taste of Blade Trinity in our mouth is like, oh man. And his career haven't been right since. I can't remember a Wesley Snipes film that was successful or even released in theaters after that. So God bless him though. I still love Wesley Snipes. I'll watch anything he's in. I think he's still one of the best actors in Hollywood. Yeah, I do. But yeah, man, Blade, 25 years old. Can you believe it? Oh man, it's really, really hard for me to to wrap my head around that because I'm showing my age, man. I really am, because I remember going to I'm like it was yesterday. I remember walking in that theater, buying my ticket, sitting down, and watching that movie goodness take place. It's amazing. 25 years, silver anniversary. Is it 25? 25 is silver, isn't it? I should know this because my 25th wedding anniversary is coming up in a couple of years. So I need to I need to get that figured out quick. But regardless, congratulations. I'm glad this film still holds up 25 years later. What an accomplishment. And it's been a while since you've seen it. Man, check it out. Check out Blade. It is still an awesome movie. It will blow your mind that it was still hold up. You know, you watch movies from the 90s or the 80s, even the early 2000s. You sit there, well, who am I kidding? You can watch a movie from a couple of years ago and it's dated. It just feels dated. Not Blade. It doesn't feel dated. And I challenge all of you to watch it and see how I feel. But hey, if you feel differently, that's fine. Film is subjective. I get it. But I doubt that you will. But I would like to know, have you ever seen Blade? And if you did you like it? Did you enjoy it? Are you surprised that it's 25 years old? Wow, man. Email the show, kbradiopodcast@gmail.com. You can look me up on all social media platforms. Just look up the KB Radio Network. Also, look me up on YouTube. Find the KB Radio Network channel on YouTube. Subscribe and like this video if you don't mind. Also, don't forget about the 5 stars, the reviews, and sharing this show if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, wherever you are currently listening to movie goodness here on the KB Radio Network. Everybody, thank you for joining me on this celebration, this review of 1998 superhero comic book classic Blade, which starred Wesley Snipes. Want you all to know that I love you. Continue to love everybody. And until we speak again, you all be blessed.